Hi, dear
Hi, Nick.
Paul. You're again here.
I'm
You're
here. I'm
persistent.
back. I
You're
know.
persistent.
You,
And
you never get rid of me.
welcome to our audience for our next chapter in Mistaken Identity, the book of Doug Dane, The Search of Self-Image. And I'm privileged that to go or to study this book with you because you have been also mentored by Doug, who is the author of this book. So you have really all the insights and directly from the author. So I'm privileged. I feel myself privileged. So welcome
Mm.
again, Paul. How are
Thank you,
you?
Nick. Thank you. Yeah, I'm brilliant. I'm brilliant. Up in Scotland, it's been a beautiful day here, and I love being in this part of the country. And yeah, it makes me think a little bit about where you are, Nick, because isn't it you have lots of mountains and things where you are?
Yes, I'm in South France, a little bit to the mountains. So we have a view on the Alps. We have a view there. So it's going up and down here also. Yeah, and that's good. That's good. The thing is that in summer it's a little bit less warm,
Uh-huh.
and so that's a nice thing. Otherwise, it can be very hot over here. But I
Yes.
love it. I'm really blessed to be in this place where I'm now.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this chapter, particularly as because you and I have been chatting before we came on, and I found out something about you. You told me that I never knew all this time.
Yeah. Wow. I'm full of
And
surprises.
yeah, yeah. And you were asking me because we're going into chapter 3 of Doug's book, Mistaken Identity. And yes, I've worked with Doug, but you also know Doug pretty well. So this should resonate with you as well. And the chapter is called Broken Little Boy. Now, again, we always say that with Doug, he had some pretty extreme experiences that
Mm.
connected with his identity as he was growing up. And it doesn't have to be as extreme as this, but you just connect with anything if you start to become aware of things that happened to you in your past. And I mean, as we go through this, there was something I was talking to Nick about just now, where I remember when I was at school and I used to, the teacher will pick two captains, and then those two children then pick their teams. Well, I would always be one of the last one or two to get picked.
Mm.
He's like, okay, we'll have that one, you have that one. And I was like one of the rotten players. And of course, you connect your identity to that.
Mm.
Um, and if you continue to connect those feelings to who you think you are, well, then we all know, whatever you think you are, you will become.
Mm.
And so all of these things that you go through, and in the book, it the chapters break up into three areas. It's really learning all the things that aren't really true about you, and then sort of unlearn eventually we're still into the learning what's not true, unlearn, and then eventually you get to the chapters where it's kind of relearn, where you start to understand and become aware of what you're thinking, and you start to think about who you truly are. And Doc talks about in here where he was adopted. And that's when just briefly mention about your, because you just told me that you were adopted, Nick,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was some things you met some of your siblings, and you connected with that experience in some ways. In some ways it was very positive. In some ways, it really gave you some deep feelings. And again, with your siblings, though, in one particular case, you were telling me they were very, very attached with their identity to
Mm.
what happened in their past. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to share that. So yeah. So I was born in France. Um, And then I was smuggled to Belgium by nuns to beautiful parents in Antwerp. So, and I always have known that it was not, this was no surprise. It was always common knowledge in the family. And they couldn't hide it because my mother is 150 high and I'm 190 and my father is 160. And so at some point it would be clear. And also my brother is only 170. So it's so, but all my life, because my parents were so open about it, they presented it as it was a choice. It was the best choice that she could make. So I was a gift. I was a gift to my parents. So that was my experience. That was how I was brought up, and that gave me the sense of like, yeah, well, it could have been different. She also could have dropped me in the garbage. So it gave me and that's more a positive side, I think. It's like it gave me a sense of purpose. But at some point, that sense of purpose still takes over. Like, because if you're convinced that you have a sense of purpose, then you have also to find that purpose. And if you're not always on that track, or you don't see it clearly in points of your life, what is the next thing, or what is my bigger purpose, if you don't find that immediately, it can be energy consuming. To say it's like still positively. And then fast forwards, just before I turned out to be 40, I heard from the Flemish government that they were apologizing for the things that happened between 1965 and 1975 with all adoptive children. And that pinged in my ear like, what are they talking about? And it turned out that there was a period that the Catholic Church, and also from social standpoint, a lot of young ladies were forced to give up their children because it was not a good timing, it was not a good thing, it was not suitable to have a child. So the parents, they sent their pregnant daughters away to camps with nuns, or hospitals where they had to work, and then to give birth. And what they did was often to send them to France. That's why I'm born in France, to send them to France, because there you could give birth to a child under what they call file X, without any trace. So that makes that you are somewhere you're existing, but all your past is like erased. And that can be, if you at that moment say, so my mother, maybe she's still grieving or is sad because she had to give you. So that at that moment, when I heard that, all my life I was happy with the situation, and then I felt like, around my birthday, well, there is someone who is maybe in grief or in sadness because she doesn't know how I'm doing. So I wanted to be able to communicate that to her and to say, well, everything is okay, it's good, thank you, in a way. And then coincidentally, I'll shorten the story a little bit, otherwise we could. Coincidentally, my daughter, she's scientific, talented, and she did a DNA sample test, so to find out where your heritage is from. And she did that test. A couple of months later, I get a phone call from a lady who's asking a lot of questions about my daughter. And then in that conversation, we made a point that she was calling me on behalf of another lady that turned out to be my half sister. So from nothing, I had a adoptive brother, which always has been my brother, and now I had a half sister. From another father, but the same mother. And she thought like, okay, I found now my mother because I have my half brother, so will find my mother. I had to say sorry, but I'm also adopted. So there was like a big silence in our conversation. And she has, when then we come to another type of identity, she has been obsessed by that X file all her life. She couldn't understand that she was born without any trace. So her identity was really strict, was really entrangled with that adoptive situation. And she has been searching. Because I had some information and the nun or the one who was transporting or I was communicating with my mother, at a certain point, at a slip of a tongue, she mentioned a name. And so I went back to my mother. When I talked, as I said to my mother, okay, I have my half sisters. So, and she was, so we had a conversation, and then she, at her 84 or 85, she remembered the name. And she didn't want to tell me that name. And she first checked with my father, do you remember that situation? And my father said, yeah, of course, that's the name. And they matched that name. And then she told me, said, I think it sounds like that. It should be like that. And that was enough for us to dig further in our, and took us a year and a half to find our mother. And we had a conversation with her. And for me, there it was good. I could say to her, she was in tears, say to her, everything is fine. So for my half sister was a little bit different, was more difficult. But that's a little bit of story. So you see that two people with the same type of experience, I gave a total other meaning to it because my parents talked differently about it than that she had.
Yes.
So, but the situation was almost identically, and the genes are very strong because my mother was a nurse. I'm a physiotherapist. My half sister, she's medical doctor. Her children, two of her children, are also medical doctor. My daughter is a medical doctor, and my other daughter is orthophonist. She's teaching people to talk.
Yeah.
Speak,
Like a speech therapist.
Yes, speech therapist. So we all in the medical sector or interested in science, and without knowing it from each other. It's not that I could have influenced my sister or whatever. So that's quite amazing.
Well, I'm gonna ask you about. I'm gonna go through the chapter and this chapter of Doug's, and then I'm gonna ask you a few things after the chapter. I'm gonna come back to the things you've been talking about.
Okay.
Because I wanna highlight how these experiences can be negative or positive. I think they've been positive for you, and I think I know the reasons why. But if we connect things to our identity and they're negative, and we believe that then defines who we are, that's a lot of the things that mean that there's a lot of people out there who have a false identity, a false self-image. Now, you are somebody who's done a lot of studying, and there's some other things that I think have really helped you. And I'm going to bring that up at the end, and we'll see what you think, because I have yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read chapter 3. Okay, so it's titled "Broken Little Boy." And there's a little quote here. Someday you're going to look back on this moment of your life as such a sweet time of grieving. You'll see that you were in mourning and your heart was broken, but your life was changing. Elizabeth Gilbert, journalist and author. I felt broken most of my life. I had very few memories as a little boy. However, social services records and the police reports describe me as a happy boy and someone who was funny. I tried to cover up my pain and fear and the darkness of my home life through sports and spending time with my friends. Those were fun times with my friends, but I always dreaded going home. When my mum would yell down the street, "Dougie Dane, you get home here right now," I'd be scared. I never knew what was waiting for me at home. Did I do something wrong? Did I forget to follow the rules? Or was it something else? I was so lost and confused at such an early age. I didn't know what was right or wrong. Everything seemed upside down. I felt so out of place. I was scared, really scared. My parents would take their anger out on me which reinforced my feelings of guilt. It wasn't until much later in life I learned that it's common for abuse victims and children growing up with alcoholic families to take on the blame and the shame. That explained a lot as to why I did most of my life. Looking back now, I understand why I felt responsible for my parents, darkness and bloody fights, even though I wasn't. But at the time, I thought it must be me. That's the beginning of feeling broken for most young people because they take on the responsibility for their parents' brokenness. I hope you didn't take on the blame or the shame for your parents' mistakes. My parents were broken. They came from a history of violence and alcohol. My birth mum was brought up in it. My adoptive parents grew up in it. And like many genetic diseases, it was passed from generation to generation. As an adolescent and a teen, I remember being disgusted and ashamed of my parents, and I felt disgusted with myself. As I grew older, I saw my dad as a pathetic excuse for a man and a father. He was drunk, he was weak, he was a philanderer, and he beat his wife. He was a terrible example of a man and father. My mum was dark and sick. She became mentally ill. The shock treatments had taken their toll, and I thought she was crazy. She was funny too, but I was still embarrassed by her and some of the antics she would pull. Later, she would beat my dad and treat us poorly. My grandparents seemed kind, especially my grandmother. But I later was told stories of how my grandfather treated my grandmother. Most of my extended family seemed to drink too much and fight too much. Violence and booze caused much damage to people. My situation was no different. I felt like damaged goods. I broke up our family, or so I thought. I remember the day I called the police and they came to take mum away for good. I was angry and scared, but it seemed what needed to be done. I would carry around guilt from that too and was stuck wondering if I'd caused the family breakup. Because I felt broken and damaged, I started down the wrong road. Our minds are like target seeking missiles. Whatever we believe and whatever we think about guides our actions. I was like a broken missile, seeking out more broken outcomes. With no real guidance from those who were meant to love and protect me, I felt I was left to find my own way. At first, you'd see the things I did as harmless or typical of a young boy growing up. But for me, everything seemed wrong. I never felt quite right about myself, and I second guessed myself a lot. Having no benchmark for right or wrong, I was quick to judge and punish myself. Inside, I felt kind hearted, but there was a dark side to me, and it became a second side of me, constantly in a battle with my distorted view of right and wrong. I pushed forward in fear. Although I felt broken growing up, it never broke me. I kept pressing on, and so have you. Don't underestimate the power of your spirit. Believe we endure these challenges to strengthen us for a bigger purpose. If you're willing, you could look at your past as preparation for something bigger. There's something waiting for you when you're ready. And there's a meditation here. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Now, there's a section here, as they do in each chapter, where you can write some of the things you've picked up. And there's some action points, which I'll go through in a little while. But having read that chapter, now, Doug has also told me that his dad, the father who adopted him, he had been in the forces in the army, and he'd experienced, battle, and this, of course, can have tragic effects on people. And from my own point of view, in my wife's family, they have seen a suicide through alcohol, and it's been found that in their case, the genetically, the boys, they can genetically be affected by this alcohol thing, I'm told, and but the girls, they were okay. So they've seen sometimes things which affect these people, like alcoholism or all sorts of challenges, and it doesn't make them bad people, but it means that when people as children have to experience these things, they can sometimes mistakenly attach these experiences that it's also something to do with them, something they feel that they've done wrong. And when they attach that to their own identity, then obviously these things can affect you later in life. Now, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as this. It can be all sorts of things that can take your confidence away or feel you're not good enough. Now, I said I'd like to share a couple of thoughts. Now, I think back to when you've mentioned your mum to me. Sometimes we'll be chatting and you'll say, "Oh, it's the time for me to ring mum."
Yeah.
And she sounds like a delightful person. Now, I didn't know it doesn't really matter, but I didn't know she was your she adopted you. And I also love the way you've described to me that your adoptive parents, they were very respectful of your birth mother and said this, she's done the best she could. And we've received you now as a gift. And they saw you as a wonderful gift that they had been given. And I would like to suggest that wonderful way of when it was a gift, you were a gift, but because they said that to you, that is something that would have been a wonderfully positive thing. I think you would have attached to your identity. I mean,
No, it reinforced that feeling of purpose.
Yes.
So when I saw around me, I met other people who were adopted who struggled through it. And then I met my half sibling later
Mm.
on in life, but before I met a lot of other people that had been adopted and who struggled with that. But because they gave me from the beginning the idea it was her um, choice and
Hmm.
we received the gift, that directed me to create an identity. Well, then you have to make something out of it because now you're a gift, so or you're you're meant to be or whatever. But that
Mm.
gave also a little bit of mental pressure, not something not like, but it's something that I still in my life say, well, you have to make you have a duty because you can't waste your life because someone took at least the effort not to throw you in the garbage.
Mm. Mm.
So
Well,
that's positive. That's positive. It's a positive thing. But it is, and then I never. And I'm not someone who like to look back or to as I always in the past. There is nothing to buy in the past. There's nothing to gain in the past.
mm.
I'm. Um, Doug is forcing me now a little bit in that book to do it anyway,
Mm.
and I feel some friction. I feel
Mm.
some resistance to do it because
Mm.
wow, there's nothing to. But now that we had that little chat again, and yeah, maybe that clears things again up. You're thinking about it,
Mm.
and probably because Doug's life was so dramatic.
Mm.
They say, wow, but I didn't have that dramatic. Of course, there were things that were at that time maybe dramatic. There are things that I will never tell in public that happened.
Mm.
Um, but did that create my identity? Maybe yes. Maybe it created a little bit my identity,
Mm.
um, for the good and for the bad.
Now you've
But
got
it's
to
something.
remember that you're a very you've trained and you've studied. You know this is not like we're chatting with someone who's just beginning to discover
Yeah.
about how their identity can be affected. You know about awareness. You know about how to be objective. You know how to take emotion and look at things and say, right now, I'm feeling this right now. Is that true? No, it's not true at all. You've got a lot of training. If we think of most people who are just beginning to sort of turn a page, and think, right, hang on a minute. Do you mean I've been feeling all this stuff and I've always wondered, I've always felt something inside that this doesn't feel like me. This is not me. They're just beginning to discover what has happened to them.
Mm.
Um, and
Yeah.
and yeah.
Because just before we started our conversation, I was
Mm.
on the phone with my mother,
Mm.
like I do every day, every other day at 6 o'clock. I'm
Mm.
calling my mother, um, and we were talking about the television thing that was on Sunday on the Belgium television, and we happened to that we were talking about I was explaining her the law of forgiveness because she also had a very abusive childhood, and she's now 88
Mhm.
and still taking that backpack with her. She
Mm.
still didn't leave it behind her.
Yes.
She never managed to understand that when we were talking about forgiveness. I explained her, and that was a very good conversation because she was say, well, if you give, in the giving is a receiving. So if you give forgiveness,
Mm.
you receive it at the same time.
Mm.
That will free you up.
Mm.
And at 88 years old,
Mm.
she said, why didn't you tell me that couple of years ago. Wow. It was like a light bulb
Mm,
because her dad, yeah, she was still waiting for a story of her father, but her father is already 20 years dead or 40 years dead. I don't know. I don't. So she can't get that story anymore. That's
mm, mm.
and she was still in the awareness. I I need to get it to go on.
Yes, yes. You've. I think from the sound of what we were talking before we came on, and they sound like wonderfully dear people who were your parents, and and therefore you have definitely connected your identity with some positive things there. My mother was also abused and lived much of her life when she was a child with an aunt of mine, which I never knew until I was into my mid 40s. Um, and again, she's probably a little bit older than your mum, but she has never been able to become or gain awareness.
Mm.
Neither of them have been able to, because they're just in that um, emotional set of um, rules that they've then identified with for all of their life, and the only way I can describe it is I remember when I was a little boy and I went to a farm, and those days they had battery chickens, which was awful. And of course, you got the chicken in this little cage. And I remember this farmer saying to me, if I open that door, the chicken won't run out because it's so used to the circumstances, it just won't leave. And I never forgot it. It was awful. I would never buy a battery chicken egg ever. And but there are so many people who have had this cage of emotion and things that they identify with, which is they think that's who they are, that limit them in their life. And even if you try to explain it, they're never going to step out that open doorway. It's something we all have to find in ourselves, that we start to feel that there's something like, no, there's something more to me than this. I know. And you then, that's where you begin to get, you start your search and you start to get the answers. And all the answers will be inside yourself. People like Nick and I will just be your guides to help you find the things that are already inside you. But many people will never ever take that first step because they just don't become aware enough, or that pull within them just doesn't ever become strong enough.
Yeah, I think it's once you go in there, and then there's this, people talk about personal development and personal growth, but it takes courage. I remember when I started my journey with Bob, it took courage,
Mm,
and also this book, it's it's counterintuitive for
mm,
me,
mm,
and it takes a little bit courage to
mm.
go through it and
Yes.
not. And then I like the way the Bob. I refer a lot of Bob because I own him a lot, so I refer a
Mm,
lot to Bob.
mm,
Um, that the way he taught us to read a book, I remember he say, "Well, the purpose of reading a book is not to finish it.
mm,
The purpose of a book is to understand it and to
mm,
think."
mm,
And yeah, before I was the type of reader who started the first chapter and then went to the backside. It was like, okay, I know it. I,
mm, mm,
I've read the book. I've read it.
mm,
But this is also a type of book of Doug. It's like it seems this chapter also. Well, okay, you can read it very fast, or you can read it and think about it. Yeah, what are the things that maybe I blame myself for? or what are the things that are positive?
Mm,
What happened in my life that I took as a foundation of for the beliefs I created now?
mm. I think Doug's book, this is really a tool not to be used on its own. You can do, but it's really something which will start to agitate thoughts in your mind. As you say, you felt in some cases a resistance, and it's kind of churns things up, and you're like, oh, that's exactly what it's meant to do. And you're not meant to try and really work all this out on your own. You
Mm,
really need a guide like yourself or myself, or whoever it is you choose, to to be that person who can be objective, who can help you start to learn how to become aware of your feelings, and also help you to understand how your conscious and subconscious mind works in relation to how you feel, and therefore how you act. And then, of course, we have the whole thing of action, which is then cause and effect. So whatever you do, there's an effect of those actions and why you're taking those actions, which is why many people will feel there's things that they want to do, but they'll say for some reason it's like there's this invisible something force holding me back, and I know what I want to do, and I really want to do it, but I don't do it. Why do I not do it? And it's because of these limiting beliefs that have been implanted like a piece of programming
mm.
in a computer that's got a virus in it. And we can help you to start spotting the wrong programming, and you will actually do the replacing yourself,
Yeah,
and put in then the correct program. At the moment, we're still looking at how the wrong programming gets put in, and then we'll start to understand more about that, and then we'll start to learn about how you can then put in your own programming, the person you truly know that you are. And that takes, when we get there, that takes a little bit of thinking about, because many people haven't actually understood how to think about, who am I really? What sort of values do I truly have? And one of the things that oh, I haven't got it here with me. It's got it. Oh, yes, it is. Doug does. He has a little card here. And when you do a course with him, or it was doing with us, you start to write down your personal standards. So the things you truly live by, and then you also do a little kind of description of again a kind of personal standard, but it's a short description of how you see your true self.
mm.
And this is something you can't do straight away, but this book and the experience takes you through the whole process of beginning to understand it, and then asking questions sometimes that you've never asked yourself before. And I think I think it's been very interesting listening to you, Nick, about your experience and how well you've used a lot of your experiences. Because, as you say, we should never live in the past or the future. We should always be in the present. And the experience you had of your stepsister, it was much more difficult for her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She suffered a lot.
yeah.
She and maybe she still is. I don't know, but she suffered a lot in the search for her mother.
It
Uh,
makes me wonder. Has she read this book?
no, because she speaks French.
Ah, now I know somebody who has it in French.
Mm. Well, I can. It's almost her birthday. May I can give it as a gift to her.
I I I I don't think it's in print yet, but I know it's been translated into French.
Mm.
And a friend of mine who's been through the course with Doug, I think she'll be able to help us out with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Could
Let's
be
do
a
that.
wonderful gift. Yeah.
So that brings us to a landing here with our third chapter. Next week, chapter 4. It goes a little bit slow for the ones who are impatient. It goes slow, but that's a good thing. Slow here,
Mm.
because it makes you think. So the if you have any questions, if you're following this series, put them in the comments or contact Paul or me if you want to have a talk about it. How you can do it. If you feel that urge, like there is more to life, but I'm stuck somewhere. I know I'm capable of more. Probably there is something in with mistaken identity.
I just
That
remembered we haven't read out the action points.
The action points.
I'll just read that out very, very quickly. If you feel broken, maybe something happened to you, or you believe you did something wrong, it's time to change your mind about it. List the ways you have felt broken and the reasons why. Next, list some things you have blamed yourself for and taken responsibility for others' mistakes. Examine each answer and ask yourself, were these things really your fault? You'll feel better when you change your mind and your opinion of your past. The key to your future starts by letting go of the past. If you see your past differently, then it's easier to let go. Too many people want to hold on to the past because they think it defines them. It doesn't. That's the action. Sorry, I almost forgot that.
Yeah, no, but it's important because that little sentence that's important in that about the I'll find it back. It's not the past that will you have to let go of the past, and therefore, I'm a big fan of the universal laws, and
Yes.
one of my favorite laws is the laws of giving and receiving, but also that law of forgiveness. Once you study it, and maybe you never can understand it fully, but once you get a little bit more awareness of it, it frees. It really gives yourself a freedom, a self-dependency, and an opportunity for an abundant life, because you don't depend anymore on someone else. And that's what I taught my mother this evening. And I'll call her in 2 days. I call, and I'm sure that she will say, "You have helped me. You told me something that's helpful."
I'm sure that you help her every time you speak to her.
I'll do my best.
Just by hearing your voice.
Yeah.
She sounds like a wonderful person.
She's a wonderful person. Okay. Dear audience, see you next week, same time, same place. And then we go for chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Look forward to read your comments or your questions in the comments. And then see you next week. Bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.